Hey students, this is Tim Clark, the Director of Academics at Neumont. Today, we're going to be talking about the Raspberry Pi. All right, students, everybody should have received a kit similar to this one in the mail sent to you by Neumont. We're going to go ahead and start opening, talking about the parts, and then putting the whole kit together. And by the end of this tutorial, we should have a fully functioning Raspberry Pi. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and open up the package. Be careful not to cut any of the packages that are inside of this package. You don't want to accidentally cut your Raspberry Pi in half, or cut a power cord, or accidentally cut your SD cards or anything like that. So start out by pulling out all the items that we find in the package, and let's go ahead and discard stuff we don't need. All right. So you should have these 4 items in your kit. You've got your Raspberry Pi, you've got the quick start guide, you've got your micro SD card with an SD card adapter, and then in here we've got the other accessories that go with the Raspberry Pi. So let's go ahead and get this one open. This one you got to be really careful cutting open because you can't see through it, and you do have your power cord and everything in here. So right there, had I gone any further down, I probably would have fit into my HDMI cable, my power cable, the Raspberry Pi case, and then your heat sinks right there. One thing about heat sinks, some of the kits have heat sinks and some of the kits don't. So if your kit doesn't have a heat sink, don't worry about it. I am going to show you how to install the heat sinks into your Raspberry Pi if your Raspberry Pi came with the heat sinks. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get started. We don't need the setup guide. I'm just going to walk you through it right now. So we've got the good old power adapter. This, of course, lets us power on our Raspberry Pi once it's all set up. So we'll definitely need that. We've got our HDMI connector. The HDMI connector, of course, lets us see the video when we power the unit on once it's connected to a TV or an LCD screen or a monitor of some type. So in this box right here, we've got the Raspberry Pi case. So this is the case we're going to be putting the Raspberry Pi in. The case is really important because it protects the Raspberry Pi from static electricity. So when you're moving it around, you're building projects, you're doing stuff with the Raspberry Pi, having it in a static resistant case helps keep your Pi safe from that static electricity that can burn out the components. So in this case, you should have the screws right here, and then we'll put the Raspberry Pi in, we'll screw it in place, and yeah, let's start putting it together. So in this box right here, we've got our Raspberry Pi. Comes with its instruction manuals. We'll just set that over here with this. Comes in this cool little case. So inside of it, you're going to see what you'd see in pretty much any computer. If you've ever opened up a computer, you're going to see just a tiny motherboard. It's a tiny computer. It is a full-blown computer. It has a quad-core processor that are like 1 point something gigahertz. I can't remember what the specs are. But it's 4 cores that all run over 1 gigahertz. And then you've got a graphics driver on it so it can connect to a display. So let's go ahead and let's talk about what is on the Raspberry Pi. So let's talk about the components. On the Raspberry Pi motherboard right here, we have an LCD adapter right here. This is for connecting small LCD display screens that you can buy. One does not come with the kit, but you can buy something like that. So if you create like a home automation or a home security or any other kind of project using the Pi, you can connect an LCD screen to it right there from this adapter right here. This right here is your mini HDMI port right here. And this one is 100% used just to power the Pi. That's all it does. So this one is strictly for power. And you can see right here on the power adapter, we've got ourselves a mini HDMI right there. And then right here, we've got our full-blown HDMI right here. This is, of course, is for connecting to an LCD or a TV, and we've got our HDMI cable right here that would be plugged into this. And then you got your processor and your graphics chip. You've got on this side, we've got our network for a local area network. This is where your RJ45 regular LAN connection would go. And then we have 4 USB ports. And I believe on this Raspberry Pi version, I think they're USB 3. you can double check your specs when you get your Pi. Right here we've got our GPIO pins. So these pins right here are for your input-output. So when you are building a project that requires additional components like sensors, like weather sensors, temperature sensors, oxygen sensors, water sensors, there's just so many sensors out there that you can buy. This GPIO pin bed or riser is what you're going to connect to a breadboard or to a final soldered board where you put all your sensors. So this is extremely important if you want to use the Raspberry Pi for the Internet of Things or for automating your life. So now that we understand what components are on the Raspberry Pi board, let's go ahead and install the heat sinks if your kit comes with a heat sink or a set of heat sinks. If your kit doesn't, don't worry about it. The heat sinks are just there to pull heat away from the chips. If you're doing a lot of really heavy processing with the Pi, the heat sinks help. They're not necessarily necessary, I guess you could say. So for these heat sinks, we go ahead and we're going to pull off the sticky back on the heat sink. Just kind of right, here we go. And then the big heat sink, of course, goes on the bigger chip, and you're going to put it right on the chip itself. And then press down, not too hard because you don't want to break anything, but enough so you know it's attached. And then the little heat sink goes on the little tiny chip. You can get that sticky back off. Alright. We got the little heat sink, the little chip. Put that on, tap it down a little bit. And then now we got our heat sinks on. So now we're just going to go ahead and install the board onto the case. Or into the case, I guess we should say. And you want, in the case right here, your GPIO pins are all going to be right here in this opening. And that, of course, is to allow you to pull cables out that run from the GPIO to a breadboard or to a riser board or some other board that you're going to be using. So the screws aren't needed. This is a screwless case. So you're just going to go ahead and put the Pi in, making sure it lines up with the holes we just talked about. Make sure it fits in there nice and snug. And then as you put the primary case, the top of the case on, it's actually going to hold the Pi board, so the actual motherboard, in place because it's going to be pinching down on the USB ports. So now we've got our Raspberry Pi all put together, so now we're ready to get it booted up. Just like any computer that you have in your home, it requires a mouse, a keyboard, and a monitor, and that's pretty much it. And you're going to be able to use it just like a computer because it is an actual computer. It's got RAM just like a computer, it's got your processor and your video card, all that stuff all in one tiny package. So let's go ahead and start out. We're going to go ahead and start out with our HDMI just so we're ready to go. When it boots up, we'll be able to see what happens on the screen. And your HDMI goes in on the side where we talked about the audio HDMI and the micro HDMI. And that one, of course, is just for power. Now, just like any computer, we're going to use a regular old USB keyboard, USB mouse. Just go ahead and plug those into your USB ports, just like you would in a regular computer. Once you got them plugged in, we're now ready to actually power on the Pi. Now, a Raspberry Pi, unlike your computer or your laptop, doesn't have a power switch. It actually is turned on the second you plug the power into it, which also means that before you unplug it when it's been turned on, you need to make sure that you power down the Raspberry Pi through the operating system before you actually unplug it. But the second we plug it in, it's going to begin to boot up. We'll go ahead and plug it into that micro HDMI, and we should see it start to boot up. Now, the first screen you're going to get when it boots up is going to be the Noob's bootloader. And the Noob's bootloader allows you to pick which operating system you want to run at startup. Now, with the micro SD card that we got that came with the kit, it comes preloaded with Raspberry, which is the primary operating system created by the creators of the Raspberry Pi. It is a version of Linux, which I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Linux, but you know, you've got Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. And so Linux is just one of the other primary operating systems on which the entire internet runs. So they took Linux, they created one that's custom to the hardware that the Raspberry Pi is made out of. And here we're going to go ahead and we're going to tell it, since this is the first time this computer has ever been started, that we are going to use the Raspberry operating system, and it is the full desktop version. And we're going to go ahead and install it. So go ahead and click install, and it's going to let you know that it's going to wipe out anything that's on the micro SD card, letting you know that if there are any other OSs already installed or operating systems already installed on that micro SD card, it's going to wipe them out and it's going to install Raspberry. And since this is brand new, there shouldn't be any other operating systems. And so it's going to go ahead and it's going to run through installing the Raspberry operating system for the Raspberry Pi. All right, we're just checking back in. You will notice that it's installing the Raspberry operating system right now, and it's going to take some time. Right now we're at about 30% is where we're at now. One thing that you do need to notice is down here on your monitor, it's asking you when it installs Raspberry, what language do you want and what keyboard setup do you want. And depending upon where you're at, you want to choose the one that's appropriate for you. Because the majority of our incoming students are in the US, we're going to go ahead and want to select English US. It's going to freeze for a second while it thinks about it. And then it auto sets your keyboard to US keyboard type, which will match pretty much any keyboard you buy in the US. All right, so installation is finished. We get the message that it's ready to go. So just go ahead and click OK. And we should get a full reboot of the Raspberry Pi. And instead of seeing the noob bootloader, we should see Raspberry Pi actually start to load up, and we're going to go into Raspberry, which is the operating system. Now, if you haven't ever played with a Linux system, it is just like Windows, just like Mac. It has a desktop, it has the mouse, it has the start menu, it has the application folder. It's, like I said, a fully functioning computer, just in a little tiny package. So here we are, we're at the desktop, just like you'd expect. Instead of a start menu down here, this is pretty much your start menu up here. Raspberry already comes with a whole lot of features. I mean, it's got a full Office suite. So LibreOffice, which is the open source Microsoft Office suite. It's the open source equivalent of Microsoft Office. You've got your internet browser. You've got your mail. You know, if you wanted to set this up to be a full-blown desktop for you, you can do that and use it just like a computer. You've got your games. You got Minecraft. Everybody loves Minecraft. And you got some Python games. And then up here we've got our programming. You can program in Java using BlueJ. We've got Greenfoot for Java if you want to start playing around with programming. And then we've got Node-RED. That's kind of like a drag and drop kind of programming interface specific to the Pi. Then you got Python 2, Python 3. You got Scratch. If you guys have done any Scratch programming. This right here is for the Raspberry Pi sensor hat, which is one of those boards that I was talking about that you can actually connect to the Raspberry Pi through the GPIO pins. And so now we've got a fully functioning Raspberry Pi ready to be used, ready to go. Have a ton of fun with your Raspberry Pi. There's so many things you can do with it. Use Google, YouTube. People have all kinds of cool things they can do with this. And you know, we are really excited to see you at Freshman Seminar.